Good afternoon, and thank you for joining this Consultancy Group webinar looking at demystifying management systems. I'm Joanne Price, and I'm joined today by Dr. Michael Cash, the chair of the Consultancy Group, who will be reviewing any questions and joining us at the end of the session. So, to give you some background, I'm an independent consultant and a committee member of the Consultancy Group. So, I've worked with many SMEs in basically helping them put in their management systems. Do you want to check with Cash? Can you actually see my screen at the moment? My
Yeah,
shared
absolutely.
presentation?
It's all great, Joanne. Looks fantastic.
Great, thanks very much. So with less than an hour, we're not going to be able to cover all aspects of management systems. We fully understand for those of you attending today, you may have differing knowledge levels. So for clarity, the session is aimed at giving you an insight into what management systems are, what options you have, what options are available to you, looking at ISO certification and what's actually involved in that certification process. Lots to actually consider. I can guarantee that you'll not leave this session as an internal auditor or an ISO consultant. Of course, unless you already are one. It will take a bit longer than the time that we actually have today. At the end of the presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask questions, and we'd ask you that you place them in the Q&A area so that Cash can take a look through them. Some may be answered within the Q&A area and others actually at the end of the session. Please remember that no question is a daft question, so please do ask them. We're here to actually respond as best as we can. If we do run out of time, we will endeavour to respond to them after that. So, why? When initially speaking to an organisation about implementing management systems, one of the first questions I ask is, why? Why are they actually going down this route? Implementing any standard costs, whether this is time to sort out your management system, resources to manage it, training, let alone the cost of the certification body and the annual surveillance visits. Some of these can actually start in the region of £700 plus a day, depending on the certification body. Some even charge in excess of £1,000 per day. So with this in mind, why do you do it? This might actually seem quite an unusual question for me to ask when an organisation has actually invited me in to help them. Is it because the company wants to demonstrate its high standard of occupational health and safety? Maybe. In reality, for many companies that contact me, it's to save time filling out supplier questionnaires. For anyone that's had to fill out a PQQ, pre-qualifying questionnaire, you'll be aware you often get that question that asks, do you have a safety management system certified to ISO 45001? Let's proceed to question 32. If you answer no, very often you've got to answer question 2 to 31. This can be a huge driving factor. However, what I normally find out is that although maybe that PQQ was the reason initially, the benefits of having the structure the standards offer can pay off in many, many other ways. It starts to focus the senior leadership team, encourages employee engagement, especially consultation and, more importantly, participation, which is a requirement of the standard. So have you ever asked why your organisation is implementing a management system or why they already have one in place? What was the driving factor? And actually understanding this can put things into context. When considering implementing a management system, one of the first decisions to take is whether to go down the non-certified route. And if we're considering occupational health and safety, follow guidance such as HHG 65 or the certified route of ISO 45001. And even then, if you choose the certification route, such as ISO 45001, it's not mandatory to attain certification. The choice is yours, and there are many things which may influence this decision. You'll be all aware of our legal duties under Section 2 of the Health and Safety at Work Act. If you have 5 or more employees, to prepare a policy. And that policy will include the general statement of intent, what's going to be done, organisation, who's going to do it, and arrangements, how they're going to do it. So this is where a management system can help you pull together all of these requirements. A management system can provide a structure for compliance and governance. Maybe one reason why a company chooses to implement a management system. To be honest, not normally their first. So back to this non-certification or certification. As I've said, the pathway is yours. But to clarify that word certification when talking about ISO standards. An organisation can be certified to an ISO standard by a third-party certification body. To be clear, certified, not accredited. If you choose to go down the certification route, I would suggest that you ensure that the certification body you use is a UCAS or your country equivalent accredited certification body. UCAS, the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, is the national accreditation body for the United Kingdom. UCAS has been appointed by the UK government to assess and accredit organisations to provide services, including certification, testing, inspection, calibration, validation, and verification. Each country will have appointed their own body similar to UCAS. So, for example, in Ireland, it's actually INAB. At this point, I will make it clear that I am not a representative of a certification body. I am, as with Cash, a consultant that assists companies in the implementation of their management systems and undertake internal first and second party audits, not certification audits. Within the UK, there are a number of accredited certification bodies out there, and their status can be checked on UCAS's website. I actually am often asked which I would recommend. I will definitely not be responding to that question during this session. Even if I have a preference, the choice is that of my clients. So let's go back to the management systems and how they are certified. It is the same, irrespective of the standard being certified. The third-party certification process is not a one-off event. It is a number of stages. Once you've appointed a third-party certification body, they'll undertake what's called an initial stage 1 audit. This is where your system will be initially assessed against the proposed scope. And when we refer to a scope, it's the elements of the business that will be included in the process. Stage 1 is an opportunity for your organisation and the auditor to gain an understanding of whether you are managing and complying with your proposed scope of services. This very often used to be classed as document review, as it primarily looks at the systems you've put in place rather than digging deeper into records and gathering evidence. The assessment audit is stage 1, completed by the auditor, and it's an opportunity to highlight areas of improvement within your system. And that's making you prepared and undertake a successful stage 2 audit. They'll generate an audit report, and that'll be generated, produced, and it will highlight any areas of improvement which would need to be completed before the stage 2. It is noted that sometimes these things you may be doing, may not be doing, but for example, there are things like maybe the internal audit in management you may not have done yet. They'll put that on the report, but you have to complete that by that stage 2 process. The stage 1 is then followed by a stage 2 audit. Normally the stage 2 would be undertaken within a few months after the stage 1. To be honest, the quickest I've achieved this was within 2 weeks. It actually was a challenge laid down by a client who was going on holiday the day after their ISO 14001 stage 1. His words to me were, "Bet you can't get this sorted by the time I come back off holiday." Challenge accepted. What you hadn't realised is that I always ensure that clients are ready for their stage 2 at the stage 1. The only challenge was having an external auditor available. The stars must have aligned as the auditor I'd been working with that day had just had a cancellation. He got straight onto his office and allocated that day to me. He also liked a challenge. Thank you so much, Steve. I took great pleasure in phoning the MD on the day of the stage 2 audit to undertake the leadership element of the audit whilst he was on his boat sailing. He had said to me, do everything you need to do, so therefore disturbing him was a great demonstration of leadership commitment. So what is the purpose of the stage 2? Well, it evaluates and confirms your management system as a whole. It'll involve a review and analysis of your processes. The auditor will conduct interviews with relevant personnel. They'll look for evidence to confirm that the management system is in place and meets the requirements of the standard. No stage 1 or stage 2 should be conducted solely in the boardroom. The auditor will review the premises, speak with people, and not just managers, but those undertaking the activities within the scope. However, if you do have someone that is, say, scared of an audit, please let the auditor know. I did have a situation where one person within the warehouse was terrified of saying something wrong, although she was actually one of the best product pickers I'd ever dealt with. We did inform the auditor, yet the auditor still went down and spoke with them. And it did take a little while for Sheila to trust me again. She was often petrified of even asking when I asked her a question. So please do keep the auditor updated. You can say no, we don't, want that person speaking with. Once the audit's been completed, there'll be a report generated and a closing meeting, in which there is one phrase you want to hear: recommendation for ISO certification. This is where the auditor is happy that you meet the requirements of the standards, and pending that formal technical review, your certificate should be with you in a few weeks. But it actually doesn't stop there. Certification cycle is 3 years and made up of 3 audits. You've got surveillance 1. Normally takes place between 6 and 9 months after the stage 2. And the reason for this is that certification is part of this 3-year cycle. Surveillance 1, 2, and recertification audit. And that final recertification audit needs to take place at a minimum 3 months before the expiry date of your certificate. Prior to the surveillance audit, your certification body will have issued you with a plan for your future audit. Surveillance audits are there to ensure you are maintaining your system. It should be noted that the surveillance audit may not look at all aspects of your operations each time, but over this 3-year cycle, all areas will be covered. However, the surveillance audits will always review the system's performance and maintenance, preventive corrective actions and processes, the effectiveness of your own internal audits, the implementation of recommendations following your internal audits, those regular management reviews of ISO implementation, things like customer satisfaction rates, updates to the documentation, incidents, accidents. Surveillance 2 is actually quite similar to the surveillance 1, but will also include a recertification planning element in preparation for that final audit of the cycle recertification. It's aimed to check if there's been any changes in numbers of personnel, operations that may need to be put into the planning for the recertification visit. Recertification, again, has similarities to stage 1 and the stage 2. And the audit is there to determine you're meeting the requirements of the standard. And hopefully, again, you get that recommendation for certification, and that new certificate could be issued for another 3 years. And the cycle starts again. Surveillance 1, 2, recertification. So a question I'm often asked is, can you lose your certificate during this 3-year cycle? You would have to do something drastic, but it could happen if you were doing nothing. You didn't undertake those system performance and maintenance, if you didn't do your internal audits, if you didn't do your management review. But if you're following the following the processes and procedures you've put in place. If you're measuring and monitoring, do what you said you were doing, there shouldn't be a reason for your certificate to be removed. During the surveillance auditors, the auditors will raise opportunities for improvement or non-conformances, minor or major. Corrective action reports may be required to be completed, and depending on whether it's a minor or a major, you may need to close out evidence within 3 months of the audit, or some may just be reviewed at the next audit. So really, yeah, you've got to have not done anything to lose that certificate. It still is possible, so always stay on your toes and do what you said you were going to do. Whichever route you take, whether it's HSG 65 or ISO 45001, or whichever standard you're implementing, ISO 9001, 14001, the common theme is a plan, do, check, act cycle. Plan, do, check, act is normally associated with W. Edwards Deming, who is considered to many to be that father of modern quality control. But what do we mean by plan, do, check, act? Well, plan includes the aspects of formulating a health and safety policy and planning its implementation. Establishing objectives, key performance indicators, plan how you're going to achieve the desired results. Set yourself some short-term, medium and long-term objectives. And objectives do not have to be a 12-month thing. You may also want to consider setting some easy wins and more challenging ones, things that may take 3 months. Whatever the objective or KPIs are, ensure that they add value to the business. Yes, there will be compliance requirements and things you'll have to measure, but think outside the box. Also, who needs to be involved? What resources will you need? So how can you determine this? Well, undertake a gap analysis. A gap analysis will help you establish where you are now and where you need to be. But be realistic. There are some things you want to achieve, but they may take more time and won't necessarily stop you from achieving certification. It's fair to say that what your management system will look like on day one will be very, very different from how it will look in 5 years' time. It's expected that a management system will mature over time, demonstrating continual improvement. Only recently, a client underwent their first certification audit for both 9, 14 and 45. And the external auditor was so surprised at how mature the system was. The reality was that even though this was their certifications audit the first time around, the systems that were being used were approximately 15 years young. The company had gone through a number of acquisitions, name changes, but that base system was the same. For me, when implementing a management system for the first time, the planning stage is the most important step. What do they say? Preparation and planning prevents. At the planning stage, ensure that you get the right people involved and ensure they have representation from all levels within the business. Yep, you'll need buy-in from senior leadership team. At the end of the day, they will be signing off the extra resources you will undoubtedly need. However, the ones that contribute the most are those actually doing the job. I was invited to a site to discuss support I could provide, and at the time they were involved in collecting plastic bottles for recycling. They used to collect the contents of recycling containers located in supermarket schools, probably all quite familiar with those recycling points. They would then transport the bottles to the warehouse, where they'll be piled up, waiting to be put into a baler, through a hopper, and then bound into cubes to head off to the recycling centres. I was stood by the baler, looking at the conveyor that led to the hopper, and asked the question, what do you do if there's a blockage? Stood by me was the managing director and Nigel, who operated the baler. Nigel gave me a perfect answer. Stop the machine, isolate the power, ensure all personnel are clear of the area, use the access platform, unblock, check everything's clear, including personnel, reverse the isolation, etc., etc., etc. I thanked him, said to the MD that, he could head back to the office as well. So I did a quick housekeeping inspection. I didn't want to take any more of his time. However, after the MD had left, I turned to Nigel and asked him again how he really unblock the baler. I told him I thought he would walk up the conveyor with a broom handle and poke away into the hopper until things were freed up. No isolation, no access platform, and Nigel just smiled. How did I know this, he asked. Well, the lack of isolation locks, the broom handle leaning against the baler showing signs of damage, an access platform stored against the wall in the warehouse blocked by bales. Going forward in developing the management system, Nigel was one of my go-to people. I wanted to know what they really did and how he could work with me and the rest of the team to develop safe solutions and a management system that reflected what they really did. Planning is a key part of a successful management system. Analysis, identify, put actions in place to fill those gaps. You then have evidence to show the auditors you're aware of what's needed. But what do these plans need to look like? You know what? They can be as simple as a spreadsheet listing the actions, but ensure this includes who has been allocated to oversee the action, the timescale for completion, and how they're going to implement it. The one thing about plans is they can change, but ensure you have evidence of why and how they have changed. But we can look a bit more in that in our check and our rep part. So we've got plan, what about do? Organise and implement your plan. For those of a certain age, it would normally show a tin of Ronseal. As the advert used to say, it does what it says on the tin. But carry out your plans. The do includes your day-to-day operations, but we need to ensure that our plans are working and having a positive effect. We've laid out what we want to achieve, but have we actually done this? This is where the check comes in. You've set out your objectives and KPIs, but this is no good unless you monitor and measure your performance. For example, things like your incidents, your near misses, your planned training. Have they been set out in the time frame you laid out? Have you achieved those KPIs? As I said earlier, make sure the things you're measuring and monitoring add value to the business. Again, this is where participation of relevant personnel at the planning stage pays off. If people have been involved in setting those objectives, implementing process, they're more likely to be followed. Part of ISO 14001. When I started working with them, I checked the records of the monthly energy readings that had been recorded by their accounts department. On the surface, these seemed like a simple task. The energy bills would be received by them, and they would enter the kilowatt hours into a spreadsheet. Simple. However, when I checked, nothing had been recorded for over 6 months. Why? The accounts department didn't think anyone was using this information and decided it was a waste of time and just stopped. And as no one had been checking this information was there, the accounts department were never challenged as to why the data wasn't. So to them, it just confirmed their initial thoughts. What they had not realised is that the reduction in energy was a key element of the objectives. It was part of the management standard KPIs. The personnel involved in recording this data had been included in the discussions around the environmental objectives, given an explanation as to why this information was required, they wouldn't have stopped recording them. So first action was to undertake some awareness training and include them in setting further objectives. We also ensured that those figures that they were collating were added to the monthly reports. These were issued out to all personnel throughout the whole business so that they then could see we were using it. So that was actually part of our acting upon. We needed an awareness training. Come to our act part. Review your health and safety performance, your management system performance, and move forward based on lessons learned. The actions from your lessons learned need to be planned. Oh, the cycle then begins with plan, do, check, act. So if you actually look into your business, do you have evidence for your planning elements, your doing elements, the checking and the acting upon? If you are, then you're a good way on the way to certification. However, the standard does not dictate to you the level of detail that you need to have. It's not prescriptive. What the standard does state is that, and I quote directly from the introduction to ISO 45001 in the area entitled Success Factors, the level of detail, the complexity, the extent of documented information and the resources needed to ensure the success of an organisation occupational health and safety management system depend on a number of factors, such as the organisation's context. So we're thinking about the number of workers, the size, the geography, culture, legal requirements, and other requirements. The scope of the management system, the nature of the organisation's activities and those related to occupational health and safety risks. Therefore, if you review two different organisations, the extent of their management system should be different. I have two clients. Both work in the oil and gas sector. One assists their clients in finding pipe cutting technicians and operates out of a managed office. They have one office, one PC, one printer, a water cooler, and one employee. The other has 50 employees, including cutting technicians. They rent equipment, they sell equipment, they have two sites, both have workshops, and they run a fleet of around about 15 vehicles. They both are in the oil and gas sector, but each with different levels of complexity. Is the level of detail of their management system the same? Definitely not. Do they both meet the requirements of ISO 45001 and have gained certification? Yes, they have. So what does the standard look like? Well, I could show you a copy of my copy here today, be a bit long to put up onto the screen, but there are over 50 pages, including the cover, introductions and annexes, quite large documents to get through. But if you are stepping out on that journey to implement a management system, the first thing you should do is get a copy of the standard. When you read the standard, one of the first things you may notice is the language used. It's not written in plain English. The standards are written by committee with representation from all over the world. They've had to agree on terminology that will be understood throughout the world, which does mean that you often come across unusual and often complex phraseology. So if you have a copy of the standard, you've undertaken a gap analysis to see what you need to implement, what you have in place and where do you need to be. As I already said, the standard is not prescriptive. It doesn't tell you how to do things. It tells you what should be included, but not what to do and the extent of level of detail. That's actually for you to decide. It's your management system and should reflect your organisation. One size does not fit all. Yep, there are requirements for the standard to have certain documented information. Base your decision on the level of detail by considering the risk to the business. Does the standard call for specific documented information? If yes, include it. If no, consider what the risk would be if those details, those documents, those processes weren't there. Would it be a risk to persons or the business? If yes, document it. Even the standard itself states in Annex A 7.5, it's important to keep the complexity of the documented information at the minimum level possible to ensure effectiveness, efficiency, and simplicity at the same time. It expands further to say this should include documented information regarding planning to address legal requirements and other requirements, and evaluation on the effectiveness of these actions. But what does this actually mean? Well, one potential pitfall for many organisations is not having relevant documented information available. The documented information is referred to throughout the standard, and it has these requirements for this documented information. But what does it mean by that? Well, first part is retain documented information as evidence. These are your records. If you've undertaken training, keep copies of certificate. If you've undertaken maintenance of equipment, keep copies of test reports and service sheets. Had a meeting, take minutes, or record actions that have come out of the meeting. The second part shall be maintained as documented information. Well, these are your procedures, your safe systems of work, guidance documents to ensure you don't fail at this point. Do a quick search, Control F throughout the standard, using the phrase documented information. So I've actually saved you some time on doing this, and I've pulled out 17 requirements. This is actually from ISO 45001. And over the next 3 slides, you'll see there are requirements for having these documents, whether that's process, procedure, or evidence as a record. It can seem quite daunting, So I'm going to break some of these down. I'm not going to be able to cover all of them in the time available to us, but let's just have a look at some of them. 4.3, scope. Scope of the management system. All this means is which elements of the business will be included in the certification process, in the certification audit. With this, we're setting out the boundaries of the management system. We're thinking about internal and external issues. What are our work-related activities? What products and services do we offer? Thinking about this in the context of being under your organisation's control and influence. So this will extend to not only your workers, but contractors, visitors. You need a documented statement to state what is covered. You know what? I often go to a website. The marketing department have very often done a fantastic job in giving you the wording you need for that scope. But it's what you're being audited on. 5.2, occupational health safety policy statement. Probably already got one if you need it under Section 2 of the Health and Safety at Work Act. Think about the A4 document hanging in reception. That should actually do it. Okay, it might need a few tweaks to include the requirements of the standard. You're not reinventing the wheel. 5.3, organisational roles, responsibilities and authorities. Why not use an organisational chart? Again, it's probably already in place. Okay, many organisations, their chart will be quite complex. Very often it only covers titles, managing director, operations director, shop floor. So what we need to just make sure again that it's tweaked so it can clearly reference occupational health and safety roles and responsibilities. Responsibilities for the management system, whether it be 9001 for quality or 14001 for environmental. Again, under Section 2 of the Health and Safety at Work Act, you need to include your organisational arrangements. So it probably already exists. Maybe just need a slight little tweak. Actions to address risks and opportunities. What about risk assessments? What about a risk plan? Business continuity planning? All of these are already maybe in place within your organisation and can be utilised. Again, not reinventing the wheel. Let's jump to 6.13. Determination of legal requirements and other requirements. Do you have a list of legal requirements, what you have to comply with? You can put this in a simple spreadsheet. You may go down the route of the subscription to a compliant service provider, but actually you could list them. If you're getting things like updates from IOSH, HSE bulletins, your insurance company, your solicitors, all of these could be providing you information on what you need to be compliant with. Put them in a spreadsheet, put a last review date, next review date on there, and who's going to be looking after making sure you're compliant. Planning to achieve our occupational health and safety objectives and KPIs. Again, you can just list those objectives, put next to it on that spreadsheet in a column who's overseeing them, add an action date, a review date. This actually is the evidence that you need to be able to show the auditor. It doesn't have to be a huge, great big plan. It can be a one-page, simple document. 7.2, evidence of competency. Now, to be clear here, this isn't about just training records. That's one mistake some people make. It is about competency. You will not see the word training in the standard directly anyway. So we're going to have to look at the skill sets required to undertake a job. Break that down. Even if it's just as simple as working in the purchase order department, we need to know how to add a new supplier. We need to know how to, place that order, how to review the order when it arrives. Well, again, just document this down in what the skill sets are that are required. But make sure then you have the evidence that you've assessed somebody's competency. And very often that can just be something as a simple traffic light system. Red, needs training. Amber, training undertaken, not yet deemed competent. Green, trained, deemed competent, ready to go. But always ensure that you have the evidence of when you last reviewed that information and when you next reviewed it. It's really quite key because you could say to an auditor, yeah, we looked at it in our last management meeting, but where's that evidence? And that's what they're looking for, is the evidence. 7.4 is quite an interesting one, especially in smaller businesses. We need evidence of communication. And in different size organisations, this may be different. You could have an intranet page, you could have a bulletin board, you could have notice boards, emails. Depending on the size of your business and depending on its complexity, how people are communicated with may vary. But let's think of the small business. How are you going to do this? Well, one client had a workforce of 7. The managing director, their 3 children, their sister, their brother, and their son's best friend. When do you think many of their discussions actually take place? Well, to the dismay of the MD's partner, it's actually at the dinner table. Do these discussions get minuted? Well, no. However, we do need evidence. So to the pleasure of the MD's partner, they now, more often than not, actually do happen at the workplace, but all they do is have an action list. So they have their discussions, they don't go to the realms of lots of minutes of meetings, but they have an action list with who's going to be doing it, by when, and when it was reviewed. So you don't have to overcomplicate these things. We'll jump to our emergency preparedness and response. Fire evacuation arrangements, emergency plans, site plans with call points, extinguishers, assembly points, maintenance certificates, a report from when you last had an actual fire drill. That's the type of evidence we're looking for. Monitoring and measuring, analysis of evaluation performance, well, they're back to our KPIs. So if you've used that spreadsheet, you can actually have that. Who's responsible, where we're up to, what the figures are. There we go. Remember, last review, next review. Let's move on to management review here at 9.3. So the standard designates the inputs, as the word goes. These are the things you need to review, and the outputs. That's the evidence, the actions from what you've discussed. Minutes are the easiest way of evidencing this, and often a central source of information for the certification body auditors. Have a documented agenda with all the inputs listed in clause 9.3. Go to the standard, there's your agenda, it's written there for you. Use that as a minimum. Have an action log where the record of the output, the actions from the management review are listed. Again, what the item is, who's actually been allocated to do it, what's the timescale for that being done, and a column of where we're up to with it, a little commentary. Although a management review is considered to be an annual event and it has to be at least minimum annually, for me, it isn't really frequent enough. Too much could have happened. Remember, it's a review of your management system. How well you've worked towards the requirements of the standard. So really, I would suggest probably quarterly. But I actually have one client who uses the management review inputs as the agenda for their monthly team meetings. So when it comes to the external certification body audit, he just gives them the action log and the minutes from those monthly meetings, job done. Not had to pull lots of things together, ready for the actual audit. The organisation should retain documented information and evidence of the nature of incidents and non-conformances. Yes, this is specifically for 45,001. There's your stats. Again, you should be maintaining your stats on number of incidents over 7-day events, riddles, etc. So as long as you're keeping this up to date and it's nicely accessible, all done, ready for your management system. And 10.3, continual improvement. At the end of the day, this is the aim of a management system, to improve. Your management system should not be a hindrance, but really should add value to your organisation. So one thing we'll say to anybody that's got a copy of the standard, go to an area that's very much overlooked, Annex A. Annex A is an equivalent of a glossary of terms, and it can provide you with lots of clarity of what's expected for the certification. So after highlighting some of this evidence that you actually need and some of this work you're going to have to be doing to comply with a standard, why do many people actually do this? Well, it does add value. It puts structure in place. One thing I'd actually say is make sure you really do look at participation and consultation. It does lead to an improvement in safety culture, especially participation. Consultation being very much telling everyone what they've got to do. Participation, getting them involved. As I said earlier on, they're the people that can tell you what really happens. So I did smile one time at a client when I stood up from a desk I was working at. Yes, I put my bags underneath the desk, and yes, I caught my foot in the handle of my laptop bag when I stood up. I tripped. I looked around like everybody does. Did anyone see me? Composed myself, and a room full of people turned to me and declared near miss. Get it recorded, which meant sending myself the email. But does ISO certification make you a better business? Does it make you a safer business? This is a debate that has taken place on many occasions, and probably something for another day. Time allocated today is probably not enough time to cover all of the key points. So it is over to you to actually ask those burning questions. But what I will say is the consultancy group are, after this, we're setting on more detailed sort of webinars covering the three main standards that everybody's familiar with. So ISO 9001, 14001, and of course 45001. So we're aiming to give you a bit more dive into the actual standards themselves. So at that point, I will actually say over to yourselves and over to Cash. I'll stop sharing my screen to see if we have any questions. And thank you for listening.
Thanks, Joanne. That was absolutely fantastic and very, very much enlightening and very interesting. And yeah, we've had quite a few questions actually. Some not specific, and others specific. So I'll just read a few out and then we can just answer these together, actually. So there was one here, and I'll paraphrase some of them. But it said, can we use HSE metrics in terms of HSE statistics to show continual improvement? If not, what could be evidence of continual improvement?
So very good question. I actually did get asked this at Farnborough the other week when we did a similar sort of presentation. Yes, you can. If you're actually gaining your own statistics on how you're performing, and then you go to the HSE statistics, very much a case if you can measure yourself against that, and if you can demonstrate that actually from as a country as a whole, this is where we sit within that, yeah, that can be used. Continual improvement very often could be something small. It could be the fact that we've gone from 50% of our workforce being trained in management skills to now 90%. That's demonstrating continual improvement. It can be that if you're looking at statistics, if we're looking at quality, for example, delivery of service, we set a service level agreement, have we met it? Have we improved on it? Yeah, with normal health and safety stats, you will hopefully see an improvement, but always make sure that you do it as incident rates rather than just the number of incidents, because that's not giving you a necessary fair reflection of how maybe if you've increased your workforce by, doubled them. If you're just purely looking at how many the number was, make sure you're doing it on incident rates as well. That will help you demonstrate it. But with continual improvement, it can be from anywhere. As I said, training, stats that you're collating, how you've met your KPIs and your objectives. It can even be down to turnover. One point many moons ago in standards, financials were not really included, but it's been more and more accepted that if you as a business are growing, developing, retaining clients, that can be a demonstration of continued improvement, especially if you're looking at 9001, for example.
Thanks, Joanne. And I think also you can link your metrics, especially if you're talking about HSE statistics. If one of your annual objectives was associated with reducing manual handling incidents, for instance, then you're obviously going to measure that internally, but you're also going to be comparing it externally. And if you're in the UK, maybe you're going to grab the HSE statistics, the national statistics for that, or your industry sector statistics as well. Okay, so that was a good question. One on stage one and stage two audits, which I think is also interesting. And that was, does stage one and stage two need to be completed for each location and remote sites?
So again, the certification body, when you first engage their services, they will actually put a plan together and determine which sites, which locations, which areas they will need that will make up part of the scope and part of the audit process. So depending if the site is a specific recognised site where people are working from, yes, it will be included, primarily in stage 2. So the stage 1's more about that document review. It's about the basis of your management system, so your processes, your procedures. When it comes to the stage 2, that's when they will do the site visits. So yes, they will, if it's deemed a significant site where they would want to go to visit, that will be done as part of the stage 2 process. However, with increasing requirement of people sort of remote working, what they're not going to do is visit all your employees' homes. So to be clear, whether it's a specific site that has significant operational requirements from. So if you did have that warehouse, if you did have a storage area, more than likely they will include it. It's very much a discussion point with when you go and approach a certification body, and they will define it. They will determine what's required and what's not required. What you'll also have to be aware of is that UCAS themselves, they actually outline very much and determine what the requirements are for the stage 1 and stage 2 audit. So what you should see is from whichever certification body you go to, the numbers of days allocated will be the same, irrespective of the one, whether it's just to name, like BSI, LRQA, SGS, there's lots of them out there. They should be the same numbers of days, because so long as you've given them the same information about your organisation, the days are set really by a calculation that UCAS have put in place.
No, absolutely, and that's where the larger your organisation, obviously, the larger those certification costs are going to be. But they also do sample. So if you're an organisation who carries out construction activities and you've got numerous
Yes.
construction sites, then they're not going to visit all your construction sites, but they're going to want to visit one site. If you're a white lining company who paint white lines on the road, again, they're going to want to visit a site. But certainly
It
it
can,
increases your certification costs, definitely.
yeah, and it can be a little bit frustrating. I've got one client who's got probably, I think it's a sort of 30 wind farms and a couple of solar farms. And as part of their certification process, they go and see one wind farm and one solar, but they only have 2. And when you go there, there's not a lot to see from the management system point of view. So very often, sometimes some of these site visits, can maybe only take a couple of hours, but it is a requirement to get, as you said, a sample of what you're doing. And they base it on the size of your organisation, the complexity, the types of contracts, and they will judge you, are you a low risk, high risk type of operation of what you're actually undertaking.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. That's brilliant. So another question here, which made me smile for some reason. But it is a good question. It says, "Hi both, thanks for the session. Keen to know what the thought process is around splitting out the management system or having it integrated."
Oh, good question. To be honest, I've had people do things in different ways. So I've had some clients who just want to cut their teeth, for want of a better description, start off with 9001. 9001 was always cast as like the skeleton, the backbone of standards, that if you get that right, everything else will fall off. You can hang everything else off. So some organisations go, we don't want to be bombarded. We want to, make sure everybody gets in the way we're meant to do these things. So we'll just start off with 9. Yeah, I had a construction project management company this year who said, let's get the heartache done all in one go, and let's do all 3. And do you know, it doesn't necessarily take any longer, because there's so many overlaps in elements of the management system that we're already doing training and competence and awareness. We're already doing a management review. So all we're doing is bolting on a few extra questions. We're not really recreating, we're doing our internal audits. So if I'm looking at procurement, for example, I'm actually looking at, okay, are we managing our supply chain? Well, I'm also doing contractor reviews and PQQs that fall in health and safety. we're looking at sustainability, we're looking at environmental. So when actually doing your internal audit, you're actually very often looking at the three different standards at the same time without really realizing it. So to some extent, it's very much, sometimes people make the judgment over cost, because of course, if you're putting one standard in, it's more that the certification element. I've got my stage 1, my stage 2, you know, I've got to go through. And they normally say, as a rule of thumb, it's depending on the size of the organisation, it's 1 day per standard.
But if you had, what would you advise, Joe? If would you operate 3 separate standards in one organisation, or would you integrate it?
Personally, my personal view, I'd integrate.
Yeah.
Because there's so many overlaps. Why duplicate the work? There are other standards that are out there, like 27001 information security technology, which really lends itself a bit more to standalone. It doesn't integrate as well with 914 and 45. So there are elements where we've integrated internal audit, but there are other elements which are just so complex that you just go, that's actually got to sit on its side. But when it comes to quality 9000, environmental 14, and occupational health and safety 45, there are that many overlaps. Personally, I always love to integrate because I don't like to duplicate work if I don't need to. I like things kept nice and simple.
No, I agree totally. It's just a matter of, in larger organizations where you've got quality managers, you've got safety managers, you've got
Yeah,
environmental managers, it's just splitting out the roles and responsibilities, to be
it,
honest, isn't
yeah,
it?
it is very
That's
much
it.
so. But you know, yeah, it depends on the organisation side, and also some organisations only choose to have certain areas of their organisation certified.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I have a company that in their group, one area is salt distribution, and the other area they do sweepers. The sweepers are not included in their certification process. They're purely looking at the salt division. So they've even taken that decision of what's important for them. And the thing to consider as well is, again, back to that question, why? Why are you doing the certification? And if you're doing the certification to gain business, which many do in that initial process, is which area of your business are you needing it for?
Okay, thanks, Joe. That's great. Hopefully, we're answering all your questions here. So there's one on documented information, but it's more to do with competence. So it says for documented information, 7.2 evidence of competence.
Yeah.
An evidence of competency will be sufficient, or should we have competence criteria? It's a small question with massive ramifications, really.
Yeah, so what I tend to do, especially for a company in initial stages, is I'll actually look at a job role and say, what do I need? So if I'm taking this person from brand new into the business, no experience, and I want them to be my most qualified engineer, for example, I actually look at what skill set that engineer has and then map out literally point by point what this new person has to be deemed competent in. But it can just be a list. You know, it can be for a forklift truck engineer. You might be just saying, can they do a service on this type of forklift truck? Can they do a service on this? Do they know how to do a brake change? And it could just be, you know, pointing out, highlighting each of those. And in all honesty, at the very early stage of your standard of putting the system in, that list may be quite small. It may be very, very small. And as you grow and you develop, those lists may become more detailed. But from a standards point of view, to comply with that clause, is you've listed out what the competencies are that are needed. The auditor doesn't really know whether that's comprehensive enough or not. But if you as an organisation have deemed that list of 10 things is enough, that's what you've deemed is necessary for that competency. And then it can be that simple as putting that on a spreadsheet and changing the colour of them, so that you don't also need to have necessarily a one-to-one to support it and back it up. Yes, that's lovely to have. Some organisations don't have that structure in place. So it may be as simple as a manager has had a meeting with the individual, they've discussed what the requirements are, and they've agreed, yep, we've deemed you competent now to go out and about and do what you've got to do. So the criteria can be as simple as you want. At the end of the day, this is your management system. So if you say, this is acceptable for us, that's fine. You've met the criteria. Whereas if your organisation states we need a whole one-to-one planning, etc., and huge loads of documents to sign somebody off as competent, then that's what you need. And this is where it is your system. It's not, certification body system.
Thanks, Joe. It's a difficult question to answer because it really depends on what you're working with. Depends on what you're working with, the hazards and risks, the
Exactly.
technicalities of it. But there should be levels of competency assessment in place, and therefore levels of required training, certification, experience, etc. And in a well-developed management system, they're going to be specified quite in quite a detailed manner.
Yeah, and
Um,
and as you said, it's one of those that it is that risk. It doesn't matter which standard you deal with, risk analysis is key. If we didn't have somebody trained and deemed competent in a particular activity, would it be a risk to the business? Would it be a risk to an individual? And if that's the case, place it in there. And it doesn't matter which of the standards that is. Doing that risk thought, risk process is actually really important.
So there was another question here about recognised accreditation bodies rather than UCAS. Well, UCAS, and if you want to add to this, Joe, that's great. UCAS is obviously the UK accreditation,
Yes.
but they're international. They're part of a whole international body of which I'm not
IAF, yeah.
familiar with a lot of them. But within your own countries, whether it's in Europe or in Africa or the States or wherever it may be, there is going to be the equivalent to
Yes.
UCAS, and who essentially ensure that the bodies who are giving out the certificates, i.e. in the UK, the ISO certificates, that those bodies are working to a common standard. So they're actually they're third party audited as well, so that the
Yeah.
standard hopefully remains consistent. So yeah, across the world there are equivalents. Okay, and I think I've lost it now, but someone mentioned a few of them, which IAS was one, and I've heard of IAS from.
Yeah, and in America, for example, I think there are 5 bodies that have been appointed. So, but you have the IAF, which is above UCAS, that they've appointed UCAS for the UK. Yes, there are organisations out there that can provide you with a document saying you've met requirements of certification, but they may not be one of these bodies that's been allocated by IAF. So I always check, go onto their website, go onto then UCAS's website and check that the certification body you're working with is an official for actually managing the standards.
Thank you. So two last questions then. Does documented information always causes a lot of questions with clients? So does ISO 45001, well, do all the standards really, certification require documented information to be stored electronically?
It can be however you want it. So it can be electronic, it can be hard copy. It doesn't state what format that needs to take. So if for your organisation, electronics the way you do it, so one of my clients is an IT consultancy and everything's electronic. I don't think I've ever seen a piece of paper in their place other than when the post comes. Yeah, I've got another client who's a forklift truck company and everything's paper. They don't have iPads, but they love it. So for them, it doesn't really matter what suits you. It's what is best for your business. So my only caveat with that is I did have somebody that had all of their non-conformances in a folder, then they had a flood and everything was lost and we had no evidence. So for me, I quite happily work with people that still want to keep things in paper, but they're very actively encouraged to scan things in and make sure you've got good backups for that. So, make things easier. And very often being able to just pull up a certificate that's been scanned in is far easier than going through a folder. But it doesn't matter. It's your system. So if paper's for you, paper. If electronic's for you, electronic. Or if it's a bit of both, great.
Brilliant. And then finally, there was a couple of questions on legal requirements. So some of the people weren't from the UK, and they were asking about legal requirements, and so just to paraphrase them, really, I think, if for all standards there's legal and other requirements, so your management system is always going to be designed to comply with legal and other requirements. Those other
Mhm.
requirements could be client requirements, or they could be
Yes.
specific technical requirements. Um, if you're in a country, and I've worked in some countries where the health and safety legislation isn't quite as broad based as it would be, say, in the UK. But you're still going to be working from your country's
Yes.
legal requirements. However, what I would say is when it comes down to risk assessment, if there were, for example, no legal requirements associated with the use of plants and lifting equipment, okay, risk assessment is going to identify that there should be controls in place for that. So the easiest thing really is to reach out to, for instance, the UK, look at UK legal requirements, and kind of use those to base that on your control strategy, really. But if there
And
are no legal requirements, it should be filled in through your risk assessment process anyway.
yeah, and the only other thing I would add to that as well is that if you're an organisation that's UK based, for example, and you're now working in France, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in the Middle East, wherever it might be, make sure you really do understand what the requirements are in those other jurisdictions. So that if you are working in multiple countries, don't just assume that the country you're operating in is sufficient. You need to be aware of those legal requirements for all the jurisdictions you're operating in that come within scope of the standard that you're actually with.
Okay, fantastic. That's
Yeah,
great. There were
unfortunately,
a
yeah,
few
we've
questions. You're going to say there are a few questions we haven't answered. We're going to go through those, and the ones that are relevant to the webinar, we will
we will,
post
yeah.
some replies to those.
No, great. Thank you very much to everybody for listening and certainly inputting with the questions. But yeah, we'll get responses back, and watch out for more consultancy group webinars coming up. And we think we've got our next one next month, haven't we? With
We have, yeah. The next one's in at the end of November, and it's on the legal aspects of accident investigations. Okay, not just why you need to do them from a legal basis, but also the pitfalls that you can fall into
Mhm.
associated with carrying out accident investigations.
That's great. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Joanne. That was fantastic.